Hello everybody and welcome into Commodity Culture, where we break down commodities markets, sound money principles, and geopolitics, all with the goal of making you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day. Today is January 9th, 2026, and I'm thrilled to welcome Dave Collum to the program. A market commentator, professor of chemistry at Cornell, and a man very outspoken against prevailing narratives on a variety of topics. Dave is well aware that he's been pounding the table on the broad market being overvalued and due for a serious correction for some time, but so have many of the world's smartest investors, and the data doesn't lie. By so many metrics, it feels like the Mag 7 and the AI revolution is a fairy tale that is set to burn to the ground when reality sinks in, and Dave breaks down why he thinks that could be sooner rather than later. Dave also dives into gold, silver, and platinum, and you're going to want to stick around to the end of the interview where we engage in an epic discussion about secret societies, the dark motivations behind the political elites, and the death of free speech around the world. If you love silver, pick up your Commodity Culture Stack Silver, Not Fiat t-shirt, backed by a 100% quality guarantee. Use the link in the description below. And now, my friends, strap yourselves in, and I really mean it this time, for my conversation with Dave Collum. Dave Collum, it is great to have you back on Commodity Culture. Now, we've spoken several times on this show about overvaluation in the current broad market, and in your recent Year in Review article, you noted that the price to book of the S&P 500 is at an all-time high. Price to sales is around levels last seen pre-dot-com bust, and the Buffett indicator, which calculates inflation-adjusted U.S. stock market value to GDP, also at an all-time high. Now, there's plenty of other metrics out there, the Shiller PE ratio, that are perhaps causing alarm bells to ring. Howard Marks recently pointing out that historically, when the market has been around these valuation levels, expected returns for the following decade hover between -2 and +2%. So I'd love you to expand on your take that you wrote in your Year in Review, which, by the way, will be linked in the description below. I recommend everybody check it out. Will 2026 finally be the year this bubble bursts, or do you think the market could remain irrational for longer than many are anticipating?
Well, I think the market has been irrational for several decades, actually. I think that the thing that I like to show, I like the case Shiller because there's good data going back to about 1880. And for 110 years, it just channeled. It just oscillated around a mean value of around 15. And then in around 1994, it escaped the channel and then just never looked back. And so the recency bias is either back 30 years, or if you want to go back to, 30, 25, 30. If you want to go back to 1981, where the beginning of the bull market started, the recency bias goes back 60 years, right? 65 years, something like that. And as a consequence, we've been in this unbelievable boom, and there's hardly a person alive who remembers what it was like to be in a serious bust. I do not include 2008, 2009 as a serious bust, because if you look at valuation charts, and you did, the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, brought equity prices down to the historical mean. So it felt horrible, but we didn't correct for two reasons. One is we didn't go well below the mean to make them dirt cheap. They were actually fairly priced in 2008 and 9. But also anything that bounces like a golf ball on a cart path back up corrected nothing. And so if we drop 50% this year, and then 2 years from now we've regained new highs, that I'm unwilling to call that a correction, because a correction involves correcting something that's wrong. And if 2 years later it's wrong again, you haven't corrected it. It's like taking out half of a tumor. And so I there's one chart in there that I don't know if you noticed. I tried to emphasize it. It's a chart showing the inflation adjusted S&P. And with a bunch of red arrows going across. And what you do is you take the 1906 high, actually it goes all the way back to some 1880 something high, but and you draw an arrow across. You don't ask the question from the high, how long did it take to recover? but rather from the high, how long did it take for it to get to that same price for the last time, not the first time? And those arrows, there's 5 of them in the 20th century that go from a high. Basically, we're tracking from a secular high to a secular low is what we're actually doing. And you say, well, that's not fair. And I go, but that's what happens. That does happen. There's 5 times, and that they take 40 to 75 years. And so if you own expensive stocks, you're in trouble. If you own secular peaks, you're toast. You're in big trouble. So the 1929 high, we got back. We recovered in about 20 years, but it turns out on an inflation adjusted basis, early 1980s, we were at exactly the same price, inflation adjusted. And there's most people who can't comprehend that. And I see podcasts. I had a Pomp podcast, and he booted up that chart. And I think we are going to go back and test the 2000 high sometime in the next 20 years and 20 to 40 years. And how we get there, there's no way to know. But I think we're going to do it. And the people just laugh. They just think that's silly. But I think if you look at the chart, it's you sit there and you go, holy shit, I never noticed that. It's almost an undeniable pattern where secular high to final secular low, treading water. And I also see things where people talk about how if you miss the 10 best days in the market, you lost a lot of money, right? But if you miss the 13 best days in the NASDAQ, it turns out at one point in time, at least, those 13. So if you subtract them, I go, well, yeah, if they're 3% a piece and you times 10, what kind of stupid metric is that? If you miss the 10 worst days, it helps your portfolio. Turns out the 13 best days in the NASDAQ were all during the dot-com bust. The 13 best days in the NASDAQ were all during the dot-com bust. So you got to be careful from idiots on Wall Street who try to sell you shit like that. It's just a load of crap. So by missing the 13 best days in the NASDAQ, you would have saved yourself an 83% decline. So I think we're at a massive high, at an unprecedented high. I think we're at an all-time high. And I also think it's pervasive. I don't think it's just an equity market. I think it's real estate, probably fine art, you name it. And so I think the everything bubble it means it's like a stage 4 cancer and you got lumps all over your body and you're in trouble.
So what do you think needs to happen for a correction to be called in your terms, for things to correct? You said if it dropped 50% and then came back, that wouldn't be a true correction in your view. What do you think needs to happen?
You got to correct price and you got to correct attitude. When it bounces back, you don't correct attitude. You reinforce bad attitude. You reinforce the idea that you should just hang on no matter what because you'll be fine. So I call it the complacency bubble because I think there's a ton of people who know the markets are wacky, right? NVIDIA, right? $5 trillion, bigger than the Nikkei, bigger than, it's just ridiculous. They know it's wacky, but they somehow think that somehow the Fed will save them. Somehow the central banks will save them, and they'll say, well, they'll inflate the problem away. And I go, well, there's a whole bunch of arguments against that, but let's start with you'll suffer badly in that kind of an inflationary environment. So you want to suffer. Look at the 67 to 81 bear market. That was pain and suffering of a higher order. The market treaded water, nominally lost 75, 80% on an inflation adjusted basis. And the worst part of it is it took 14 years. The 1929 to 33 peak to trough was like a clean flesh wound. It went right through, right? And then we sort of climbed out of there. And we had some trouble at 38 and stuff like that. But you do not want, like the Nikkei spent 35, 40 years underwater, right, from the 89 high. Inflation adjusted is probably still underwater at a Nikkei of 50,000. You don't want to spend 40 or 50 years getting nowhere. You can't afford to do that. And I think that's what we're going to do. And so every goddamn podcast I do says, Collum calls a crash. Collum never calls a crash. I never call a crash. I think we're going to rot ourselves to death on this one. And it's going to get knocked down 20% in buyers. Let's say we start a bad period. It'll get knocked down. The buyers will then jump back in and it'll recover a lot. And then they'll get knocked on their ass again. And that'll just keep happening over and over and over. And then there'll be a new high potentially, but then they'll get knocked on their ass again. And you'll look up 30, 40, 50. So I did the math. So let's say we're 200% over historical valuation. Not all the valuation metrics say that, but the Case-Shiller PE, for example, does, and I think Jesse Felder's composite valuation metric does. You can't inflate your way out because it's the numerator and denominator are both inflation sensitive. So if you're sitting at a Case-Shiller PE of 42, which is where we're at, and the historical average is 15, if you cause inflation, the numerator and denominator are just going to track each other, and it doesn't solve the valuation problem. You actually have to hurt the price relative to inflation. And so you say, well, what if we grow our way out? Well, if we grow our way out at 2.5% GDP per year, how long would it take us to grow our way out such that if we don't move a buck on the index, but we just grow our GDP and end up at a Buffett historical average valuation, it'll take 45 years. 45 years. That's 1.025 to the 45th power gets you to a 200% gets you to the 200% gain that you need to grow out of it.
The sponsor of today's episode is ARK Silver Gold Osmium. Owner Ian Everard is praised even by his competitors as one of the most honest and level-headed bullion dealers in the United States. They have some great prices. You can see some of them displayed right now on screen. Take advantage of these specials today by reaching out to Ian at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arksgo.com. Make sure to tell him, of course, that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. Well, in your year in review, you also noted the work of Michael Green in regards to the impact of passive investing. You wrote, the idea is so simple. Hand every month's allocation savings to your Vanguard's S&P index fund or any one of a bazillion clones and then forget about it. It has worked brilliantly since it first began in the mid-1990s. I think passive investing has been so successful that most people are now trained to think investing in an index fund is basically a high interest savings account that presents no risk. The whole random walk down Wall Street theory that don't bother trying to, find things that are undervalued and don't bother trying to pick individual securities. Just throw everything into an index fund because fundamental analysis doesn't work, technical analysis doesn't work, and this is kind of the only way to go. However, this has presented perhaps a massive danger. How does this massive influx of capital into these market cap weighted indices affect valuations? And does it extend this bubble farther than would normally be possible?
Well, whether it's causal or not, I don't know, but there was a law passed in 1994. You may recognize that was the date that I said it left the channel, that somehow allowed passive investing funds to do some stuff that made them more efficient, so they became more attractive. And Green says it was in 1994 that law was passed. So Green and I have exactly the same date coming at it from totally unrelated positions. And so what happens is it is not imaginable to me that you can keep just growing the market valuations in perpetuity. Because at that point now you're just trading NFTs or Pokemon chips. If we have a huge problem if our equity markets cease to reflect the idea that they represent a cash flow from functional wealth creating businesses. If that's gone, then free market's gone, the economy's gone, and I tell people, show me an asset that got way overvalued that didn't ultimately find its way back to cheap. It always does. There's no example of that in history. And so I don't know when, I don't know how, I don't know what by what path, but if we're 200% over historical average valuation, and if it gets back to cheap, call it 50% below historical value, we're going to destroy lives. We will destroy the boomers. And I believe that as the boomers ceasing to put money in and starting to take it out, that'll contribute to reversing the passive flow. I talked to a very famous guy who knows Mike Green very well, And he doesn't think in the foreseeable future that passive flow will reverse. So Mike is more agnostic. Mike seems frustrated. He seems like he maybe can see evidence that it's sputtering a little bit, sort of like your car sputtering, and you go, wait a minute, what's going on? Something's not working here. A deep recession could slow the flows, could it reverse them? I don't know. The flows are coming from overseas, geopolitics, it's not like they aren't getting more volatile. A serious beginning of a correction could cause people to start hitting the sell button. And since it's a single button, boom, one click sells the whole market, right? You've got an index fund, you've got Jack Bogle's fund, one click sells the whole market, everything's going to sell. They have no cash buffer, there's no market makers. And so if I put in a $100,000 sell order to the market, they have to sell $100,000 with equities. And then the question is, who is going to be the buyer? It is so far to date for many, many, many years been the passive flow was the buyer. If the passive flow reverses, who's the buyer? There's no short sellers left on the planet because they've been destroyed. So short sellers often are buying the dips because they shorted. Now they got to cover. So they often buy the dips, they sell the tops, they round out the sharp peaks and troughs. They're gone. Name a guy who's a pure short seller. I don't think you can. The Jim Chanoses of the world, Bill Fleckensteins, they've all said, no, this game, I'm not playing it anymore. So as the market's currently priced, it's priced return about 2.5%. When it has a PE of 15, it's priced return about, 7%. So are the boomers ready to get 2.5% off of their investment? And if you tread water, you say, well, at least I get dividends. Well, the S&P's dividends are 1.1%. So as I said, my copy editor actually didn't get the joke. I said there's no F in dividends. And he said, I don't understand that sentence. I go, say it fast. There's no F in dividends. And so you're not. And by the way, the dividends are 1.1% versus the historical average of 4.4, and versus the high from years ago of 6 point something. That is a valuation metric. It means you're getting no cash flow off of your investments. It's like buying a Toyota. It could be a perfectly good car, but if you pay $150,000 for it, resale is going to suck. I don't know when. I look at podcast comments. I think I've got to a point I can now spot the bots. I think I'm getting better at spotting. I see the same comment in every one. I go, there's some computer that's just got one comment. But the complacency is just extraordinary. It's just extraordinary where the people just say, well, this guy's been calling for a crash for 10 years or whatever. And I go, yeah, at some level, they're correct. But also, I make a case this year, as you may have noticed, that in 2015, the legends of Wall Street, not just the data, not just the charts and the valuation, the legends of Wall Street said, we have now recreated a gigantic bubble again. It is catastrophic. What the hell are we doing here? And I'm not talking smart hedge fund managers. I'm talking the famous guys saying, we are now staring back into the abyss. How did this happen so quickly? And then you go, where did it go from there? Straight up. So either they were all wrong or we are all fucked up. We're just in worse shape than we were before. And the returns are extraordinary off of that 2015 valuation. And so if regression of the mean is a force of nature, it's a truism. And I just don't know when. And it's got to be tied to the boomers aging, right? It's got to be tied to, there's things. And so I've made a list of about 10 risks, I think, that could cause the flows to reverse sign. And Green says once the flows reverse sign, you will have these air pockets that will not be met with buyers. They just won't be there. And once people say, and you own a stock like Philip Morris, it's a P of 10 and a dividend of some number of percent, like 6%, which I own. And if you put a gun to my head and said, buy something, Philip Morris, Rio Tinto, I'd probably buy those, right? But when the PE in the market in 81 was 6, half of the stocks in the market were below 6. So if you own something with a PE of 12 and you think you're safe, well, if you get a dividend, you might get it, although they might stop it too. That's an arbitrarily chosen thing to do by the company. But if it goes from a P of 12 to 6, you just lost half your money. And by the way, that means you lost half of your income for the rest of retirement. No one is thinking in these terms. So you can hear my frustration.
Yeah, and like I said, I think a lot of it is just the normalization of throwing money into an index fund. A lot of retirees, they look at it as a savings account, like it's a bond or something.
And that we've been saved over and over and over. Now, here's the thing that drives me bananas. So everyone on the planet can all agree that the Fed kept rates too low for too long. To that, I add too many times. And now what are they saying? The Fed has to drop rates. I go, didn't you just say they kept it too low, too long, too many times, and yet your solution is to drop rates? You're a retard. You're a complete idiot.
Yeah, I concur with that.
And right, and then housing's too expensive. You guys can't buy it. I said, so let's see if I got this right. We've got a choice. You can either drop rates to some basement level, which allows the boomers to sell you in a 50-year mortgage, allows the boomers to sell you their house without any capital loss or erosion. So they can get out of their highly appreciated asset, handing it to you as a youngster, such that some point in the future when rates go up, you get obliterated because now your house is not worth that. Or we let the price of houses drop so that you get to buy it at a credible price. And the boomers have to suck up the loss and capital gains of their house. Which should we choose?
Well, apparently now, what
I know what the boomers.
Yeah, what is the latest scheme that Trump has cooked up? He's forcing the government to buy mortgage-backed bonds. Isn't that the latest thing that's claiming that that's going to somehow reduce the mortgage rate?
I have a book recommendation. It's something like "What Happened to Capitalism." May not be quite right, but it's by a guy named Ruchir Sharma, and it's not a screed. It's not a Marxist screed. It's not. He's not a libertarian. He's not saying just leave us alone and let us do whatever we want. It's none of that. The way I describe it is two things. He says we flood the system with a ton of money, and then we try to use regulations to control the consequences, and it doesn't work. He said we have the way I phrase it is we have bad interventions with good intentions. And so we intervene in some way thinking we're fixing it, but they're not going to fix it. It's just going to make it more broken. And he goes through all these arguments, and it's really well done. And I've told this to several people, like Steve Hanke in a podcast, and he said, oh yeah, I read his stuff all the time. So he is a highly respected guy, but he talks about this idea, this nonstop interventions that are really a consequence of their flooding the system with money and they need to keep intervening. And then you say, well, what if you don't flood the system with money? Well, now we've got a bankruptcy problem, right? We've got too big a deficit. And, inflation is not monetary, in my opinion. I know Milton's rolling in his grave. Inflation is government spending. Government spending causes the monetary problem. So I think you can trace inflation to government spending.
Well, I'd love to get your take on both gold and silver here, as both metals recently hit new all-time highs. Silver in particular has been going on a rampage. In addition to displaying some very volatile price action, but recently hitting new all-time highs, we are above $80, I believe, as of the time of this recording. Do you feel like we're getting overbought here when it comes to silver in particular? And just your thoughts on both the precious metals, and perhaps you could throw something in about platinum, because that's also done tremendously well. I know that's something we discussed in the past, and you made a good call on that.
Yeah, it does feel frothy. And so I think you have to make one of two arguments, either that we're due for a breather, there's a euphemism people like, or digesting the gains, or getting our ass kicked, I don't know which. So it's possible that silver, and there's narratives, right? There's claims there's a silver shortage. Smart guys make the claims. I'm not qualified. I can't figure out if their claims are right. And they talk about breaking the COMEX and all this, and that silver could go to 200, and this is both the frothiness, or finally something has changed, and that the rigging of the paper markets, which is real. It's not to say that they're rigging it to make you go any one direction or another, but they're rigging it so that they make money. Right, so they've turned our retirements into their casino. It's always that way, but it seems to be more egregious than it used to be. And they're screwing around with people's lives. Some guys in cubicles, they're just having a ball, making money, and getting hookers and blow during their time off, but it's our retirements that they're messing with. It's our lives they're messing with. So I'm not very sensitive to if they get their asses kicked royally. I'd love to see those guys out on the street. Love to see private equity out on the street, absolutely destroyed. And so either there's something big happening or it's frothy, and I don't know which it is.
And talk to us about platinum and your thoughts on that.
Platinum is a different story. So the platinum story is interesting, and I mentioned Hanky. Hanky's a currency guy, and he's very outside the box. And he one time sent me an Excel spreadsheet with all his investments. Holy moly, you have never seen such weird investments. All these currency swaps and everything. It was really a weird portfolio. And he says, tell me more about platinum. So I talked a little, and then I sent him my write-up. And then I did another podcast with him about 2 weeks later, and I said, well, what about platinum? He said, oh, you were dead right. So the platinum story is as follows. Platinum's used in catalytic converters. There's actually increased jewelry demand because gold got so expensive that apparently the Chinese are saying, well, that wedding ring, we can make that out of platinum instead of gold. But the catalytic converter of internal combustion engines, which you could say are dodo birds going out the door, I don't think so. As long as Doomberg's right, and there's tons and tons of fossil fuel, we're going to have internal combustion engines. Things like China, they're gagging on their fumes, and so they have reason to have more efficient catalytic converters and scrubbers and things like that. Critically, while electric vehicles don't use a lot of platinum, hybrids use more platinum than internal combustion engines. And I think the hybrid is the optimum technology. I think to have both fuels at one time makes total sense to me. I could be wrong on that. Now, here's the real story. According to multiple sources that I've tried to cross-check and shoot down, and I've tried to use AI to find alternative answers, the current deficit production of platinum, which comes 70% from South Africa, 15% from Russia. There's a North Dakota mine or two, something like that. But South Africa is the biggie, which is at risk of being a failed state, right? I mean, South Africa could really, and you go, what does that mean? Well, when Marxists grab the machinery of production, what they usually discover is they don't know how to produce anything. And so Venezuelan oil, great example, right? 4 million barrels a day. Now they're making 1 million barrels a day because they've got their heads up their asses. So we're in deficit production now. And if you look at the above ground available platinum supply and the deficit production, platinum, we've got about 2.5 years of platinum left. Now, the message there is it's a phenomenal supply-demand problem. Phenomenal supply-demand problem. And it's not like you're all of a sudden going to increase the production fast, because that's not how mining works, right? Mining is a very sluggish thing. You don't all of a sudden say, that big open pit mine, let's crank 3 times as much shit out of that mine, right? Or let's open new mines. No, you don't do that either. So if that's true, then you say, well, maybe they won't use platinum. I go, well, you're going to sell Ford F-150s no matter how much that catalytic converter costs, right? You're going to be price insensitive, not because not because you don't care, but because it's too small a percentage of the car to stop production. because of it. So it could cost 5 times as much platinum. They'll pay it. They'll just tack it out, and the Ford F-150 will now cost $90,000 instead of $80,000, whatever it is. And so I think there's tremendous reason that the fundamental story of platinum is right. You're not chasing price like gold, potentially like silver. I don't know. The silver shortage argument, I don't know how to get my brains around it, because silver kind of permeates the earth. You don't find jars of platinum in people's dressers and stuff, right? But silver, you could imagine silver coming out of the woodwork if as the price goes up. Platinum won't come out of the woodwork. There's no woodwork with platinum in it, right? You don't have a jar of platinum coins that you collected when you were a kid or anything. So the platinum story I really like, because it's a fundamental story, not a price story.
Well, let's get into the arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro as we switch more towards geopolitics. Would love to get your overall thoughts. Do you think Greenland and maybe Canada could be next? And midterm elections coming up, I believe that's November of this year. If the Democrats win the majority, are they just going to reverse everything Trump is doing and move to impeach him, and all of this will be for naught? How do you see this all moving forward?
Boy, I'm outside my skill set. I've done enough podcasts lately where, fortunately, there's been another guest who knows I can kind of fake it. I can Milli Vanilli it a little bit. To me, Maduro, I almost get the feeling Maduro agreed to be arrested. Let's start with that, because he looked at the life expectancy of former dictators is not high. And so I think Maduro might have said, holy shit, the writing's on the wall. Come and save me, right? And we might have even cut a deal where we say, look, we're going to throw you in jail for a little while, but then we'll set you up on some Caribbean island and you can, just keep your mouth shut. According to Hankey, they left the regime intact. And he says, new boss worse than the old boss. So he thinks they've lost ground by taking out Maduro. And he was the advisor to several Venezuelan presidents, so he does know this world. I just got off a 2-hour podcast with Michael Yan, and everything for Michael's military, and he thinks this is all just the big Game of Thrones chess match where everything's about resources and access to trade routes and all sorts of things like that. If the bad case scenarios are if we somehow get dragged into a boots on the ground war or a protracted battle that costs us a fortune. If we can do a hit and run, then it will not be a terrible failure. But I also suspect, and this is just from watching just news events over my lifetime, that I don't think it would shock anyone if Venezuela fell into a state of total chaos. Now, did we know that when we took out Maduro and said, yeah, it'll turn into chaos, but then we'll go clean up the mess and get the oil and whatever? I was shocked by people's opinion as to why it was a good idea. I don't have a problem with it being a good idea because I don't understand why we're doing it. It could be Monroe Doctrine, right? Could be we're accepting the idea of a multipolar world and say, okay, multipolar world. We got Russia and China and U.S. and some bricky shit, stuff like that. And Trump could be saying, South America is ours, Western Hemisphere is ours. Get out of here. And that's not irrational, I don't think. As long as too many people don't pay with their lives and starving to death and stuff like that. Although history shows empires do that all the time, right? It's not like the Romans didn't kill a few en route to becoming an empire. But I also could imagine it just going catastrophic, like so many of our military endeavors do, and then I don't know what to make of it. I don't think it's about just the oil. I don't think it's just the oil. Especially if Doomberg's right. We have a ton of oil. We don't need to. And, when we attacked Iraq, I remember there was an article, and they quoted um, a German oil analyst who said, "I don't understand the Americans. We just buy the oil." Right? And it tells you that it couldn't have been about the oil, right? I mean, and now it could be that ExxonMobil wants to sell you the oil, and they don't like the idea that Saddam is selling you the oil. I am unsympathetic to that. I don't like that model at all. I don't think we should be killing people so that the Dole brothers can grow pineapples in Hawaii. That was the first overthrow, by the way. That was the US's first overthrow, was Hawaii. They took the Queen of Hawaii out. There's a good book called Overthrow by Stephen Kinzer, I think, but it's called Overthrow. And it's about 13 explicit US sanctioned, sponsored overthrows. They're very careful to say, look, our fingerprints are all over a lot of stuff. These are 13 that are unambiguously, we just overthrew, like Mossadegh in Iran and places like that. There's a lot of people I know who are from South America who really hate what we've done to South America over the decades. So this could be more of the same. I'm just babbling now.
So is Greenland next at this point? Because Trump has indicated that that could be a possibility, and even Canada, which he's been talking about as well. Are these things on the table in your view?
I think Greenland's probably on the table. I think it's been discussed in previous presidencies, and I think there's a certain amount of logic to us just bringing it into our orbit and saying, okay, no one's doing anything with it. It's just a big rock covered with ice. I don't know if there's a reason why we really want it, whether it's a mineral thing or whether it's just a why not. Maybe a national defense thing. Maybe we want to put military bases there, but we could probably find some way to do that anyways, because we put military bases anywhere we want in the world anyways. Canada is a more interesting question. I think Canada requires the Canadian sign off. I don't think we're going to invade Canada, but there's some pretty seriously unhappy provinces up in Canada. One of them, I can't even remember which one's which now, but one of them's kind of in the middle. So that if they seceded from Canada, Canada would all of a sudden be two separate countries, kind of like, I never have understood East and West Berlin embedded in the Soviet bloc. I never understood the West Berlin. I never understood the importance of why West Berlin was so meaningful to us, because it seemed like such a royal pain in the ass. Say, go ahead, you guys in the Soviets take West Berlin. Maybe it was militarily strategic. So Canada's a maybe. I've spoken with a Canadian guy who knows this thing, goes to a lot of important meetings, and he thinks Canada's days are numbered as in its current form.
I would tend to agree with that. Yeah, I'm actually giving a presentation about that at the VRIC coming up at the end of the month. But
so what's the cause? What's the problem? Are people just pissed off or what?
Well, I think it involves a number of factors, and these similar factors are plaguing a lot of these legacy brand Western countries, such as the UK as well. We're seeing a rising cost of living. Wages are not keeping pace. That's one of the main issues. Prices for homes and rent are skyrocketing. Now, the reasons behind it are because the bureaucracy has become so incredibly bloated, in my opinion, when it comes to the Canadian government. And if we go even deeper than that, there's a bunch of different theories on why the West is falling apart, and a lot of them really fascinating. But there's a guy named Jiang Sui-shin. He does this channel called Predictive History. He's a school teacher in Beijing. And he's got a really interesting series called Hidden Secrets of Power. I recommend people check it out. And he believes that bureaucracies in Western governments have been taken over by secret societies who want to invert good and evil. And that those are the people who are pulling the levers of power.
So would this be the whole satanic cult crap and stuff like that?
Well, maybe the Frankists. The Frankists are a religious organization that believe to actually become one with God, you have to sin and you have to actually destroy reality. They have some sort of twisted religious ideology behind them. But when it comes to Canada in particular, you look at things like MAID, how they're assisting people in dying, and the requirements are getting lower and lower. Recently in Calgary, there was an instance where a woman, the court agreed she's allowed to die. Now, she's been diagnosed with autism and ADHD, but beyond that, there's no issue. Like, it's not like she's in pain and suffering. And her father was trying to stop the courts, and the courts ruled no. I think she was 27 years old. I mean, I was not very smart at 27 years old to be able to make that sort of decision. And they're saying now, at the moment in Canada, like if you have mental problems, if you're depressed, that's not allowed yet. I believe they're pushing for that to be allowed in 2027 or something.
I thought it was.
Not yet, I believe. But in this case, they're saying she has autism. That counts as a disability, so she's allowed to die. And so far, over 70,000 people have been killed by MAID. This, to me, feels like human sacrifice in some form or another. I mean, there's a bunch of other examples.
Or at least some sort of human decay, right? Some sort of societal decay, end of civilization type thing. The problem is I think right to die under the extreme conditions is totally rational.
Yes, I agree.
If you're in excruciating pain and stuff like that, but a 27-year-old can be in excruciating emotional pain and not give a shit a year later.
Exactly.
And so I think we're at great risk. I think the abortion battles, I'm a pro-choice guy, but not too many years ago, at least, the left were pushing abortions to end of third trimester, at the contraction phase of birth abortions. And I go, if you push it that far, you give me a binary choice of no abortions or that, I'll switch to the no abortion team very quickly. And so I think the activists were trying to get sort of the ultimate win, the ultimate women's choice, freedom of choice story. And it's just stupid. It's dumb.
Yeah, I also believe the whole gender identity thing could perhaps have a twisted religious belief behind it. The change, again, that whole inverting, turning virtue into evil and evil into virtue. So changing genders in children. And in Canada now, in many places, the school, like the teachers are allowed to discuss gender with the students, and they're allowed to keep it secret from the parents that their boy has decided he's now a girl.
I thought that stuff was going to go away.
Yeah, it hasn't in Canada.
I'll tell you, I'd have a chat with that teacher that would be off the record that would say, if you continue doing this, your house is going to burn down.
Yeah, and that is one of the main reasons I live in Serbia. I do not have kids yet, but I do plan on it. In Serbia, there's no debate. There's no discussion.
Poland doesn't have the debate. Hungary doesn't have the debate, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Since when is the Eastern Bloc the voice of reason in the world, right? That's a sort of a funny situation. So, I've been reading my year in reviews from 16 years forward, and I'm almost done proofing them all because they're all getting bound by Bob Moriarty for reasons that I didn't know at the time, but I'm now realizing that I benefited enormously. So it's like 3,500 pages. I don't know. I'm going to have to add it up one of these days and find out how many pages it was. And you can see trends and patterns and oddities by looking at what happened year after year after year. You can see it economically. You can see it in social structure. I really thought that we had dealt with the super wokey shit. I thought that we were not going to be hearing about guys and women's sports, which I'll fight to the death on too. You want to call me a misogynist pig, have a ball. I've been called worse this year. If you don't want to support women's sports by protecting young women from being invaded by dudes, you're fucked up, not me, right? You can call me anything you want, but you need to pull your head out of your ass or get a psychiatrist or something. And if someone wants to call me out and give me guff, I'll go, yeah, let's have it out. Let's take the gloves off right now. Let's do it. Let's have the fight. And so there's some real stupid stuff. And I was stunned reading from not too many years back some of the complete absurdities that society had signed off on. Like some woman got fired because of something her father tweeted 5 years earlier. Just insane things like that. And I go, take the gloves off. Mencken said something like, there comes a time when men need to, take their gloves off and break out the knives and start throats.
Yes, well, this is one of the other issues with Canada, is that the people are so complacent. They either agree with everything that's being done, or they're meek and just they want to get along with everybody the Canadian niceness is not actually being nice. It's just a desire to not be singled out and to not have to take action. And this is pervasive throughout society. But I want to end now on digital censorship, control of the narrative online, something political elites seem very focused on for 2026. The UK, Germany, and Australia seem to really be leading the way when it comes to arresting people for tweeting things the government doesn't like, all under the guise of anti-hate speech. But this is another issue in Canada. Now they are attempting to pass legislation that could see the Gestapo at your door for indicating you don't like diversity. The EU, of course, has become an absolute cesspool of anti-free speech activism on the part of these political elites. Now, the internet and social media obviously has its issues, but it's one of the a few places where everybody can kind of voice their opinion. Do you think the elites see this as a major threat to their power? And will there come a day when conversations like we're having right now will be censored for being fringe or against the norm?
I think it's possible the day the internet went live, we charted a path to authoritarianism. I think it's possible that it was not avoidable. It was one of those, if you follow the bouncing ball and say, okay, where does this eventually take us? I'm not convinced that because the internet is so powerful that whoever has control of it will have the power and they will use it against us. So I don't think there's any reason to believe that people in position of great authority will become good guys. And all of a sudden, because the addiction to power seems to have, history's been pretty clear on that point. One ex-Stasi guy said, if you think the government's going to collect information on you and not use it against you, you're out of your mind. And so it is possible that I timed my existence pretty perfectly, and that I won't have to be around for the real bad parts. I don't know. They could come faster than that. But I think Twitter was kind of saved by Elon, not that it's perfectly saved, but it's way better saved than it was, right? I mean, when you got booted off Twitter for being anti-vax or saying the election was rigged or whatever, you can still run into guff, though. I think there's still algorithms that are controlling the flow of your information pretty seriously. And they're certainly controlling the information you get. I'm going to do an experiment with my brother at some point. We're going to do some searches and look at how they differ. We're going to parallel search identical topics from our two computers. Like on Twitter, just search some topic and then see what the top 10 tweets are and see if we're being fed different information. I'm a big opponent of fact checkers. I think the fact checkers are all propaganda. They're all propaganda. I think they have the luxury of telling the truth sometimes because the truth actually works in their best interest. But, if you search anything dicey like, did the Clintons traffic children, you will get just fact check after fact check after fact check that said they didn't, when in fact, above the fold news story said they did. And a very famous Army intel guy named Tony Schaffer told me personally, I asked him that question. He said, oh yeah, the Clinton Foundation trafficked children like crazy. And the fact that the president of the United States and the president wannabe are trafficking children is already not a good sign. And the fact that I don't think there's any doubt that Bill broke some laws in his sexual exploits, right? I mean, if you had to bet your life, how you'd bet. And the fact that he hasn't in any way paid for this, right? And Pete Diddy did all sorts of bad stuff. He got convicted of prostitution. So there's no, as I said to Tucker, there are no rules. Above some socioeconomic cut, there are no rules. There's, James Comey will never go to prison, even though I think he was treasonous. And it might be thousands of people who are treasonous and were in a position to do something, and therefore you round them up. Now, this is now starting to sound like kind of a brown shirt moment in Germany too, right? So when do you cross the dotted line and you become the historical bad guy? I don't know. But I do know that I wrote about January 6th back when it happened, and I just proofed it the other day. And I was stunned at how bad it was. I'd forgotten how thoroughly I had written about it. And I've been shocking myself with my former writing. And you hear about some guy who's being tortured in prison, a January 6er, right? No one should be tortured in prison, let alone the J6ers, who were just protesters, in my opinion. It got out of control, but that's what protests do, right? Big crowds do occasionally get unruly, right? It happens, and it doesn't hurt when you got 274 FBI guys stirring up the pot.
Let's wrap this up with a bit of a bow here and kind of just quickly get back to the digital censorship topic, because I'd love to get your thoughts on where you think that's going, particularly as we're seeing, a guy in the EU's being sanctioned for,
Great Britain's
being an
in
enemy.
Terrible shape. Great Britain's in terrible shape.
But Great Britain's in terrible shape. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen and other EU elites are out there talking about how there's freedom of speech, but
No, there's not.
Anything with the but after it's a big problem. And like I said, in Canada, they're looking to pass new legislation. Australia, after Bondi Beach, the Prime Minister comes out and says, we cannot have this anti-Semitism raging, so we now need to implement certain hate speech laws.
That's a different story. Here's the question that I have, and that is why these people obviously have no respect for what their system is founded on. Why would they so when you open the southern border in the United States, when you take away people's civil liberties, do you have no understanding of the foundations of our system? I mean, we had a great country at one point, and if you throw it away, you're going to really regret it. So why do they not have some sort of dotted line? They say, no, I won't go below that. I'll be self-serving. I'll be narcissistic. I'll do that, but I won't throw the entire United States or my entire country, Great Britain, Australia. There's a whole bunch of them that are suffering. And I don't understand why they don't have some sort of guardrail that says, okay, be it steal, cheat, do whatever, but don't do that. Right? It's like if you read Steven Pinker's book about medieval, about violence in the past. He says when you read about some of the things they used to do to kill people, right? So in the old days you didn't incarcerate them; that was too expensive. So you just whacked them. And when I was reading the book, you had to take breaks because some of the ways they thought of whacking people were so bad, were just so ugly. And you had to say, I can't read any more of this shit. And as Pinker said, I could be standing in front of Adolf Hitler and not think of doing that, right? And so why do these leaders not see the problem that they are sending us into this Orwellian future? And what would they say if you confronted them with that? Well, what do you think their explanation would be? If I could, von der Leyen and these guys are the Brits who are really performing terribly. What do you think they would say?
Well, I think their true motivations could be religious, as I alluded to earlier. And so obviously they would not give you a straight answer.
King Charles and his pedophilia and stuff like that?
Well, that I'm not really too aware of King Charles's history, but that is an interesting point though, because Charles was involved with Jimmy Savile, right? That was like his best friend.
Right.
So what's up with that connection?
As was everybody.
Yeah.
Well, there is a theory that everyone knew, but they weren't necessarily participating. So I've seen arguments made that Jimmy Savile was a perv, but he was only a perv himself. He wasn't a trafficker to the elites. But I think those arguments are specious. I think the royal family is incomprehensibly screwed up.
Yeah.
I think the Rothschild family is incomprehensibly screwed up. I think there's, if you start reading about this stuff, it's mind-boggling the stuff you can read. And you don't know if it's true, but there's these seemingly self-consistent stories of just wretched cultural evolution within these royal bloodlines.
Yes. And
things that they do to children and stuff like that.
Yes, and I think so. I think all these people are psychopaths, so they have psychopathy. So they enjoy inflicting harm and suffering on others. And I think there is a way to ensure that a child grows up a certain way and also gets that mindset by abusing them. And I think a lot of abuse goes on within those families.
In fact, I mean, there are claims by abused victims that they're like eighth generational satanic. They come from eighth generational satanic family. They traffic their own kids into the satanic networks. They're just horrible. And the stuff they do, this is not just dancing around and acting like idiots, right? They're horrifying things. I would love to know what's on that frazzle drip laptop of Anthony Weiner. And I guess I would love to. It's quite possible I would not. It's quite possible that it would just haunt me for the rest of my life, knowing that shit's happening. And I do believe, according to one podcaster who's a very smart guy, he says Satanism is actually the fastest growing religion right now. And, historically it's been there. So would it have gone away? There's no evidence that it would necessarily have gone away. So I got to stop reading that stuff. It's actually ripping my soul out through my nostrils like an Egyptian mummy.
Well, I think that when we look at a lot of the actions of the elites that seem confusing or that seem like, how could they possibly do this? A lot of it's attributed to ignorance or just these people are stupid. They're on a power trip. But if they do have a hidden motivation behind the scenes, that is some twisted religious belief, and that religious belief revolves around the inversion of good and evil, then a lot of their actions actually make sense. That's my thought. We've had a large span, far-reaching conversation today, Dave. It has been awesome. Why don't you tell us where the best place is for people to go to follow you? As I mentioned at the top of the show, you dropped your year-in review for 2025 recently, so I'm going to put a link to that in the description. Is X the other place people should be going to follow you?
Yeah, Twitter under David B. Collum. The other, if you want, you just search YouTube under my name and you can binge. My annual review, I actually, for archival reasons, list all the podcasts I've done that year. And it's around, 85, 90 podcasts this last year. This year's year in review is a little screwy. I mean, it's unusual. It's different than all the others because I sort of got disenchanted and disoriented and could not figure out how to separate fact from fiction and sort of a really sort of crisis level confusion. And then again, I got into it with the Zionists, which was very unpleasant. And that's sort of calmed down, not only in the world, but in my head. So I've come to terms with the fact that Mark Levin can hate me and I don't care. The one thing I do worry about on that is I don't want my colleagues to have to suffer. I don't want Cornell to have to suffer. So I don't like the bad press it brings to other people. I could live with it. And Mark Levin can eat shit and die for all I care. So.
Awesome. Well, on that note, I'm going to put links to your X account as well as the year in review in the description. Thank you so much, Dave. It's always a blast when I have you on the show.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. This episode is brought to you by ARC, Silver, Gold, Osmium. They have some great specials on silver bullion products right now. They are on your screen. These are subject to change and well supplies last. So reach out to owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you, and pick up your Stack Silver Not Fiat t-shirt available exclusively in the Commodity Culture shop using the link in the description below, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.